So it makes me want to know maybe what influenced these ideas, if it's Persian, if it's Greek or what. It just fascinates me to wonder about this, but I don't want to die on any hills of genetic connections or potential influence, because we can't be too confident on that.
There are some parallels in Greece for the idea of astral immortality, but it wasn't all that common. Now, whether that played a part in it, we don't really know. I think the main idea seems to be that they thought that the good would be taken up to join the heavenly host. And you get that also in the book of Enoch.
So my final assessment as we're dealing with this, we've nailed Daniel. We didn't get into how Daniel's using an already failed prophecy by Jeremiah to kind of, the can got kicked down the road, if you will. And so they're now trying to make, a fulfillment out of the can. And now they got to kick other Jews and Christians later. They're taking the can that was kicked down the road again of this failed prophecy and kind of redoing it. And that's because they're still, another way to put it, like the book of Revelation says, no more tears, no more death, no more darkness, no more suffering, no more, because there is those actual things in the world of these people. Technically, this still needs to be fulfilled. Cognitive dissonance. I don't need to go into what they do with failed prophecy here, but in the book of Revelation, I know we're not nailing that. I'm getting Olivia to join me on a deep dive, but I see a similar thrust. These predictions, hints at Jerusalem already being destroyed, and the city where the Lord was crucified, Revelation 11. And I never was able to interview your wife before she completely retired. But is there any teasing you can give us on what you think Babylon is in Revelation 17? And it's like, there seems to be this thrust toward predictive language in the visionary way in which this angel's portraying it to John about what is soon to come, using already happened stuff like the war.
Yeah.
How do you interpret this in a few?
Well, I mean, in the book of Revelation, Babylon is obviously Rome. It's the city on 7 hills. And, it's Babylon because Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. Therefore, Rome is the new Babylon.
What would you say to someone who says the zealots who took over the temple destroyed Jerusalem?
Baloney. They may not have liked the zealots. They may not have approved of them, but no, they were not the ones who destroyed Jerusalem.
Would it be a red flag too?
A huge tour de force to blame, to cast Babylon as symbolizing Jews. Doesn't make any sense.
And one more observation that I recently looked at that really made red flags, because Revelation loves to quote scripture, and it does a midrashic kind of thing. And I see Nebuchadnezzar as almost like a template where he's forcing them to worship him in his image. And you get this language about this beast who's like demanding worship. And I thought, because I've got people in the preterist camps and online who want to say it's all Jerusalem, Babylon's Jerusalem. They want to make everything Jerusalem. A lot of conservative Christians do this that are preterist, as you well know. And huge red flags to me is like, when did these Jews, zealots, whatever you want to call them, Sakari, other people have different identities. Steve Mason disagrees with them as being a category anyway, that they set themselves up as God to be worshipped? No. That is not a true Jew would never push that. I can see an emperor doing that, or at least an imperial cult, but it just didn't make any sense to me either.
No, I mean, what you will find is that people think sometimes that the destruction of Jerusalem was triggered by the zealots, by the impious actions that were done in Jerusalem, and therefore God allowed the Romans to destroy it.
Got it.
But you will not ever find them saying that the zealots were the ones who destroyed it.
Got it. Okay. So they could have played a part. You are fantastic.
On this business of reinterpretation, are you familiar with 4th Ezra?
I am. I'm not as familiar, of course, off the top of my head and memorizing the whole thing, but I have read it.
Towards the end of 4th Ezra, there are a few great visions, and then an angel explains them to Ezra. And at one point, it sees an eagle coming up out of the sea, which isn't a very felicitous image in a way. It's heavy-handed, but the eagle is Rome, obviously. And he says to Daniel, now this, to Ezra, this is the 4th beast that I showed in a vision to your brother Daniel, but I didn't explain it to him the way I'm explaining it to you.
love this.
That I think is beautiful. So they
I
do the reinterpreting.
Yes, you
And
know what? I have to admit, as I was a fundamentalist most of my life,
yeah,
and I thought, this is it, man. This is amazing. And then, you grow up a little, you learn a little bit more, you are willing to go beyond your comfort zone. And now I'm in love with this stuff in a whole new light because there's so much more depth to it to me to
yeah,
see how humans just keep using these things and doing it. There's so many almost like treasure troves of secrets to discover, if that makes any sense.
yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Now, if we're talking about predictions in Daniel, we've got to also deal with the ones that the book ends with.
Please.
In chapter 12, from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolates is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Now, we know exactly when the burnt offering was taken away. We may not know the exact date at this point, but we know the year, certainly. And 1,290 days. And then the next verse says, happy are those who persevere and attain the 1,335 days. Now, so you're given two different numbers. Why? You've referred to cognitive dissonance and Leon Festinger's famous book, When Prophecy Fails. This is a well-known phenomenon, say, with the Millerites and those people in the 19th century. If your prophecy is not fulfilled, what's the first thing you do? Recalculate. You say, maybe I made a mistake in the math.
Right.
Maybe the Lord has given us an extension. And it takes quite a while before you come round to saying, gee, I was wrong about that. You remember Harold Camping?
Yes, sir.
A little over 10 years ago, predicted the end of the world in some days in August. And, he was interviewed afterwards, if you know Zeke Peastrap.
Yes.
Well, Zeke interviewed him, and Camping actually said, well, I guess I got that wrong. And I must say this increased my respect for Harold Camping enormously. He was at heart an honest man, and he was able to admit that he got something wrong.
Wow.
Now, but in the case of Daniel, Josephus, writing, 200 years later, or a bit more, said, Daniel was the greatest of the prophets. He not only said what would happen, he said when it would happen. And you want to shake Josephus and say, but Josephus, he got it wrong. And Josephus, I'm sure, would have said, oh, no, you just have to interpret it.
Another calculation.
It's a mystery. And, people have taken these numbers and reinterpreted them in every century since then.
And the 490 year, right?
Yes.
So,
and one thing is like with the Lord, 1,000 years is as a day. Well, if that's the case, it could be quite a while yet.
Exactly. And didn't he end up drawing the conclusion that Vespasian was the predicted Messiah, which was odd? Jews would have never.
This was Josephus.
Right.
The reference was to an ambiguous oracle, as he calls it, that a man from the east would rule the world. And we don't really know what that oracle was or where he got it. But his stroke of genius when he was captured by the Romans was to say, that's Vespasian. That is you, Vespasian. And Vespasian was impressed. And indeed, Vespasian then became Roman emperor. And this proved that Josephus was a prophet.
Right.
Wow. This was a conversion like what we have seen with J.D. Vance. Of somebody who goes from fighting the Romans to somebody who goes predicting the next ruler of the world.
Dr. Collins, there's so much to dive into with your works. I really appreciate this. We now have high confidence. We should. Daniel made predictions that did not come to pass at the end there. We didn't even really ask why this is written and what was, a little psychology. But, I know that Jonathan Z. Smith and others talk about this, in blessed memory, about the idea of why write apocalypses to begin with. And this one idea, I'd like to end on this, if you're okay with that. And that is, a lot of people online have come up with the idea that really it's Jerusalem. They see a constant condemnation of Jerusalem in the Gospels. They think Paul's pro-Roman because in Romans 13, he says, pay your taxes, and God put Rome in control. So they almost see this thrust mostly throughout the New Testament as if the New Testament is just pro-Roman and anti-Jerusalem cult through and through, meaning they don't find condemnation of Rome. And so they get to the book of Revelation and they interpret that same lens of how can we fit this where Rome is not condemned and it all matches Jerusalem. And so they come up with ideas. Even Barker has made this attempt and such, that the city on the 7 hills, she's looking for a Jerusalem that might have 7 hills. She's trying to find evidence that supports that. And what would you say?
Save your time with Margaret Barker.
I will. What do you think about that whole notion? Because I personally understand why they wouldn't outright condemn. They killed. This would be clearly treacherous to the empire, right?
I don't think they're even being all that subtle.
Really?
The Babylon analogy is very blatant, very open. Well, at least very open to any Jewish person. Now, whether the Romans, the whole thing may just sound like gibberish to the Romans. 4th Ezra, using the eagle, is much more transparent. But now, there was a strong movement in New Testament scholarship in the first decade of this century of empire studies, which was going to the opposite extreme. And Paul was anti-empire. Jesus was anti-empire. And that too, I think, was a little bit off the deep end.
Like John Dominic Crossan kind of, in a way.
He got in on it. Yes, eventually. Right. Horsley would have been a more extreme proponent.
Got it.
No, Horsley was an old 60s radical himself, whereas Dominic really just went with the fashion of the moment.
I've heard it was his experience in Ireland, and that I think Del Allison Jr., when I talked to him, kind of thought that maybe his issues with, what has happened, civil war in Ireland, played maybe a role in some way to his interpretation.
Not that much with Dominic. I know Dominic very well, but
okay.
But anyhow,
well, I don't want to psychoanalyze.
Yeah. Don't want to get into discussing those. But I'm just saying that both extremes are wrong. Now, okay, the Book of Revelation is vehemently anti-Roman. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and there isn't any doubt that Rome is what is being attacked. Paul, I think, is much more subtle. Paul didn't want trouble with the Romans. Therefore, he says, pay your taxes. For that of it, even Jesus said, pay your taxes. He wasn't looking for confrontation, but they weren't pro-Roman, or they weren't either really pro or anti-Roman. I think they, wanted to steer away from all of that, but not the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation, I think, is quite open about it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. John J. Collins, Emeritus, ladies and gentlemen. Get his books if you haven't. Where have you been on this planet? If you haven't read one of them, at least. Any final words from you to someone who might be researching apocalypticism, investigating biblical studies, encouragement, anything you'd like to add?
Look, it's great stuff. It's endlessly fascinating. And it's kind of fun besides. You'd better not take it too seriously. I'm not sure. It's been said, but one of the reasons why people wrote apocalypses was to have hope in times when there was no hope. And so what they typically hope for is for the Son of Man to come on the clouds of heaven, or for the Archangel Michael to appear and solve their problems. And while you think that is going to happen, may give you great comfort, if you get into the state where you think it is actually happening, you're in trouble. And there have been some notorious cases of that.
Right.
Of people who think the end has come. That's the Millerite tragedy.
In that case, just to give people context, so they know, some people sold their homes, their farms, their livelihoods. And I think this happened with camping, Harold Camping as well. Some of the devout followers believed it was happening and literally got rid of their property. I mean, forsake your goods, right? You're going to heaven, baby. That's scary that people actually are believing this stuff, literally.
So keep it in the future.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.